And your work specifically on the Maidan, right? Because I think people that are not aware of your work should know about this. So it's only in the last like 6 months or so that I came across your articles on this, and this totally changed my perspective, my understanding of what happened then. So the right now, if you look at, for instance, like the Wikipedia entry in Maidan, or you look at, just like Western coverage or whatever, the understanding is Victor Yanukovych sees these protests and he decides to crack down hard. And ultimately, when we get to February 20th, 2014, when the massacre occurs, I believe it's something like, 58 people died and a couple hundred get injured, something along those lines. That this happened specifically because of police repression. Now, according to your research, and this is based on like hundreds of, if not more, hours of video footage. This is based on the treason trial, right, of Yanukovych. This is based on like tons of like sworn testimony. And it seems like in the vast majority of the cases where protesters are interviewed and anybody that, needs to be interviewed for this information, it seems as if they are specifically blaming either directly or indirectly the militant groups, right, the right-wing groups that are providing the muscle for Maidan. It's true that at its peak, there's maybe 100,000 people, just regular, kind of like Western liberal types in Ukraine protesting in favor of the EU association agreement. But the muscle that is being provided for these protests, which is, by the way, this is why the right-wing groups are eventually given so much respect and have such an outsized role in government and policy making in Ukraine. It's because of the support, the physical support through heavy arms, right, that they in Maidan. If in fact this is what transpired, the West has absolutely every obligation in the world to, as quickly as possible, not escalate the war, but to end the war, right? Because they engaged, therefore, by, immediately recognizing the new Maidan government, despite the fact that there was like an agreement at the time with Yanukovych, like, okay, by February 21st, there was this agreement in place that was brokered by Poland, France, and Germany. I mean, these are major powers. And the agreement was, we're going to have early elections. We're going to have mutual disarmament, right? We're not going to continue these hostilities. But that was totally, ignored, right? This is again, Ukrainian sovereignty and Ukrainian independence being sort of messed around with, right? So to me, it seems as if, based on these events, the United States, they have, essentially no right to immediately recognize this government, in this kind of a cosmic system. I mean, maybe they have the legal right, but generally speaking, it doesn't seem like a good idea. And second, as engaging in the first escalatory actions, they now have this mandate to end the war as soon as possible instead of further escalating it. So maybe you could comment on that and your understandings of what exactly changes. If your research on Maidan is correct, what exactly are these obligations and whatnot?
I think based on my research, which is also based on analysis of all publicly available information. So this is, means like, I think more than 1,000 hours of footage, kind of video footage, audio recording, and Maidan Massacre trial, which is broadcast on the web, Yanukovych treason trial, and all other public evidence like media analyzed for, including live massacre, which I was watching 9 years ago, because I was specialized in researching conflicts and political violence in Ukraine. So I was reading this and studying this for a very long time. So I can say that there is no doubt. So this is beyond any reasonable doubt, which is standard, can be used in legal procedures, in criminal cases, and which is even much more significant than standard which is used in academic research. So all the evidence basically shows beyond any reasonable doubt that this massacre was organized and perpetrated not by the Yanukovych government, not by his sniper units or any kind of police units which are charged with the massacre, but it was organized and perpetrated within movement of elements of far-right opposition and also Maidan opposition, oligarchic parties like Fatherland Party. And this massacre was a crucial kind of event which led to overthrow of the Yanukovych government, along with assassination attempts against him. And this kind of violent overthrow of the government was this massacre led to violent overthrow of the Ukrainian government, and this violent overthrow was supported, and de facto Maidan massacre was also supported de facto, at least de facto, by the Western governments, which immediately recognized new government of Ukraine. And this is very crucial for understanding conflicts in Ukraine and origins of the conflicts in Ukraine, because this massacre ultimately led to conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and now which Russia now escalated by dramatically by invading Ukraine. But this conflict goes back to Maidan massacre, when the conflict became violent conflict and not just peaceful conflict, when you have just competition or or political controversies and so on. But this conflict now became violent, and this is now very difficult to end. And this conflict still continues to escalate, and this is very dangerous in this regard because of this situation. So in terms of and what was the second part of the question? Can you just repeat this? About
what changes, like assuming what you're saying is true, what changes exactly?
This is why this is a crucial issue. This is because to understand this conflict and how it started. So this started all this conflict started basically either by Maidan opposition or by the West. I'm not sure exactly what was decisive at this moment, because according to testimonies by two leaders of Svoboda Party, far-right Svoboda Party, they stated in their interviews published in Ukrainian book by two pro-Maidan journalists in Ukraine. They said basically that before the Maidan massacre, a few weeks before, they had conversation with representative of the Western countries. They did not name countries, they did not name who was this representative, but they said that this representative basically had discussions with them and other Maidan leaders about when Western governments would change their policy of recognition of Yanukovych government. And they said that this policy, they debated how many people need to be killed or would be killed when this Western policy would change concerning Yanukovych government. And they said they have discussion like 5. They said 5 is not enough, like 20 would not be enough. And they basically agreed a few weeks before the Maidan massacre that 100 would be number of people killed.
Was that the heavenly 100? Is that what it comes from?
Yeah, this is exactly what happened. I think this is why it's not accident that immediately after Maidan massacre, Maidan opposition, oligarchic opposition, declared this heavenly 100. This was specifically in what was meant by the West, basically as condition for supporting the new government and ending the recognition of Yanukovych government. And this has happened. Even so, there was not 100 people killed, protesters killed. So they included, in order to have 100, they included people who died from natural causes, from illnesses in other regions of Ukraine. Some of them committed suicide and so on. And even one member of Yanukovych office was included among 100. So this was specifically created to have, this is consistent with this 100 goal, which was specifically discussed by Western representative and Maidan opposition, including far-right opposition, Svoboda Party. And this has happened because Svoboda Party actually, they declared that they, for instance, before Maidan massacre, they took control of the Hotel Ukraina. They said they're going to guard this hotel. They would take control of this hotel, which will continue working as usual. And this hotel was base of Maidan snipers. And there are like testimonies, and like from Maidan massacre trial, absolute majority of Maidan protesters testified that they were shot by snipers, not from government positions in front of them on the ground or any location of snipers in any government buildings, but they were shot from the back, from the side, from the Hotel Ukraina, which was then controlled by this far-right party, by Maidan opposition. And there are videos which show, like, inside of this hotel, this entrance was guarded by Maidan self-defense units. Svoboda leaders were inside. They do not allow anybody, among even Maidan protesters who wanted to capture snipers, they were not allowed to go to upper floors, prevented by security and by by Svoboda leaders and self-defense. So this is like what the evidence is there. This is like the forensic examinations by government experts, ballistic experts, which show that bullets which were shot from which protesters were shot did not match bullets from Berkut, from government police, Kalashnikov, or even from sniper rifles, because there was no bullets from sniper rifles, but there were hunting ammunition used to kill Maidan protesters, and caliber of some of the bullets which protesters were killed did not match even caliber of bullets which were used by weapons which were used by Berkut police or by government sniper units. So this is like evidence. Medical examination by government experts shows that almost all protesters were shot not in the front because they were facing Berkut police in front of them, which were shooting, but shooting not into them, but they were shooting into government, shooting in the ground, or in shooting like in specifically to contain advance of these protesters, but not to kill them. But they were also shooting into Hotel Ukraina, into upper floors, into middle floors, because of a roof, because this was location of snipers, Maidan snipers, who were shooting both protesters and the police. So this medical examinations showed that absolute majority of protesters were shot, almost all protesters were shot from a very steep direction, from the back or from the side, not from the front. So this is again matches all this kind of evidence, and this is in New York Times there was an article which they claim that they did reconstruction, some architecture company did reconstruction of Maidan Massacre, of 3 protesters killed, which matches the location of Berkut police in the front. But this was based on fraudulent kind of changes of location of bullet wounds, specifically to make them to fit Berkut location, because autopsy kind of documents which were published by this company and which was also presented during the trial show that these protesters were shot not from the front but from side, from very steep direction, which matches location of snipers. And this is again all the evidence, like testimonies. There are like several hundred testimonies of witnesses about Maidan snipers, about their knowledge in advance about capture of Maidan snipers, that this were not government snipers, and so on. There are admissions by 14 members of sniper groups about shooting both police and protesters. This is again, and nobody is arrested or or was convicted for this massacre. Now, almost 9 years after it took place, basically. So today it would be, so we're talking about Ukrainian time, this already would be 9 years already after this massacre. Nobody is arrested now or was convicted for this massacre, even so this is one of the most documented cases of mass murder. And there are like videos which I found and analyzed in my academic studies, which are also available on YouTube, which show actually Maidan snipers shooting into this buildings in Hotel Ukraina. Kind of Maidan protesters noticing these snipers. There are like more than 100 testimonies during Maidan Massacre, videos which show which protesters pointing to snipers in this building in Hotel Ukraina and so on. There are like videos of far-right group of Maidan snipers shooting from Hotel Ukraina in direction of Maidan protesters. So all this kind of evidence, which is overwhelming evidence. There are like videos, even this video, BBC video, which shows one of snipers shooting into direction of Maidan protesters in BBC crew from a room in Hotel Ukraina on the 11th floor. And this room was, according to Ukrainian investigation, occupied by Svoboda, one of the leaders of Svoboda party, far-right Svoboda party. And this is like another video by Ukrainian journalist, television, shows that at the time of the massacre, this journalist would point to the same room and saying this is a location of snipers, and he films them shooting. This video of this sniper shooting into the actual Maidan protesters, and this journalist saying that this snipers in this Hotel Ukraina were shooting protesters in the back. So this is like all this evidence, like just overwhelming evidence, videos and other kind of testimonies, and there is no evidence at all that there was any order by Yanukovych or any other kind of government leaders or commanders to massacre Maidan protesters, and even government snipers, according to their testimonies, according to videos which are synchronized, they arrived to the Maidan massacre site only after almost all protesters were already killed. So Maidan snipers kind of killed Maidan protesters and police, and then there was deployment of government sniper units. When they arrived, massacre almost immediately stopped. And shooting moved to areas which were controlled by Maidan, because then there was government snipers deployed. So this is actually totally opposite from what happened and what was presented by media, which is a very different kind of outcome. And this is, I think, a very important issue because of consequences of this massacre, very significant. Because after this massacre, this led to overthrow of Ukrainian government. Russia responded by annexing Crimea, which again, and then supporting also separatists in Donbass. And separatists in Donbass was local uprising, but supported by Russia. And Russia directly intervened in the Donbass war, which is kind of this led to conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which now kind of escalated into this very dangerous war between Russia and Ukraine, but which is also not accidental that this war is a proxy war also between West and Russia, because Western countries use Ukraine as client state. So Ukraine basically became client state of the West of the United States after Maidan, because then the United States kind of de facto kind of played a role basically in recognizing and legitimizing a new government of Ukraine as a result of Maidan Massacre. Even so, the question, there is no evidence of direct U.S. involvement in this Maidan Massacre, but there is kind of a policy of U.S. government changed almost basically immediately after Maidan Massacre, as was mentioned by this Western representative, that they would change policy of recognition of Yanukovych government after there would be 100 protesters killed. And in his memoirs, Biden, who was then vice president of the United States, said basically that he called Yanukovych right after Maidan Massacre on February 20th, 2014, and told Yanukovych to leave not only position as president of Ukraine, but also to leave Ukraine. And this is what happened. Kind of Yanukovych.
That wasn't Obama. I believe that was Obama, right?
No, this Biden was vice president. Yeah, Biden was under Obama, but Biden then was responsible for contact with Ukraine. So Biden was person who was in charge of policy towards Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And this is why this is important. This is like Biden mentioned that he called Yanukovych. Kind of, and Obama then in interview to CNN, he said basically then that the United States and he kind of were kind of involved in kind of organizing political transition in Ukraine even before Yanukovych fled. So basically, Obama admitted that there was U.S. involvement in this kind of overthrow of the Ukrainian government and removal of Yanukovych without any kind of constitutional agreement, without any constitutional rights. This was illegal, overthrow by means of Maidan Massacre. But Obama said that the U.S. helped to kind of to undertook a transition of a transition of power in Ukraine. This is admission by Obama, and then he also admitted that Russia then annexed Crimea in response to this. So this is, I think, very crucial issue to understand the conflict in Ukraine. And this is not like black and white conflict, which is often presented by media, which specifically omits any reference to Maidan Massacre. So this is why all the evidence is available. I studied this, I presented this at top conferences, published in peer-reviewed journal, academic books, but the media basically ignores this, and this is like kind of people who just follow this conflict. They would have very little understanding of origins of this war. But this is, I think, very crucial issue to understand the conflict in Ukraine, and this is why kind of Russia also used this violent overthrow of Ukrainian government to justify its invasion, because Putin claims that this was fascist coup. Kind of even so, this was not my research. I researched the issue of the far right. This was not fascist coup, because kind of far right was not dominant in UK even during Maidan. They were having crucial role during Maidan Massacre, but they were not alone. There were other sniper units, and there was also oligarchic opposition involved, and Western countries provided de facto support, at least de facto support. So this was not just kind of fascist coup. This was kind of, and there was no neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine as a result, but this was kind of far right, which played a very significant role, and they were in power in Ukraine, but not as a single force. They were just kind of they joined the first government of Ukraine and became integrated in different military units, national police and security forces, but they never became dominant force in Ukraine. And the most important force was oligarchic politicians and kind of like Poroshenko and parties like Fatherland Party after Maidan, and this continued with selection of Zelensky, who actually promised peaceful resolution of this conflict, but actually ended with a war between Russia and Ukraine, and I think which would be kind of very negative effect on this future of Ukraine. And this is why I'm pessimistic about future of Ukraine, because now I think it will be very difficult to resolve this conflict peacefully. It was possible to resolve if people would kind of, if Ukraine was treated actually as equal country, as not kind of as some kind of second-rate country by Western countries which supported violent overthrow of Ukrainian government, but instead, if they were supporting actually Ukraine as a kind of future member of European Union, like or making Ukrainian the same policy would apply to Ukraine, which is policy which is used in democracies like Canada. So then it was possible to resolve this conflict peacefully, but they decided to use Ukraine as a kind of to contain Russia or to weaken Russia, and this is why I think now, again, Russian policy now expanded to annexation of regions of Ukraine beyond Donbass and beyond Crimea. So this is now, I think it would be very tough to have peaceful resolution of this conflict. But I think this is a very crucial issue. Maidan Massacre has almost kind of decisive role in the start of this conflict, and so this is not a black and white issue. This is a much more complex issue, and this is why I think it's important to understand this conflict based on evidence, not based on politics. So there is nothing political. I have no association with Yanukovych. I have no association with Russia, but this is, I rely on evidence. So I just present whatever evidence says, and I study the conflicts professionally. And this is why I can say beyond any reasonable doubt that this is what happened, and not all the media basically inaccurate representation. Even so, there were a few media, Western media like BBC report and German television documentary which revealed similar kind of evidence and similar information about first flag Maidan massacre and the involvement of Maidan snipers, but now it's almost again totally forgotten or not mentioned even by the media or even politicians.
So you did this paper that you presented back in 2022, and I just want to read an excerpt from it that I found pretty amusing on the Maidan and sort of the kind of like ideas behind all this. So Leonid Kravchuk, the first president of Ukraine, revealed that he received information about a plot to assassinate Yanukovych around the time of the Maidan massacre. He stated that this plan was called Ceausescu after the last name of the last communist leader of Romania, who was assassinated by soldiers soon after snipers massacred the anti-government protesters in a false flag operation. Right. And it's sort of like contrast with what happened with Maidan versus what happened in this other nation state. The former Romanian president, prime minister, and a number of other leaders of the Romanian Revolution were charged by the Romanian prosecutors in 2018 and 2019 with crimes against humanity for using deliberate disinformation and diversion right after they seized power in 1989 to provoke false flag mass killings. And I think we could sort of use that to like maybe like briefly discuss this idea of like, all right, is this a Western-backed coup? Just like, you know, understanding what really happened during the massacre is important, I think, for any sort of policy decisions and, you know, ethical obligations that, you know, the world's most powerful state would have. I also think it's important to understand whether or not this is some sort of Western-backed coup. And I want to be like sort of like very careful here, and I don't want to bore the audience too much, but I think this is like there's like 5 parts to this question. I'm sorry, but okay. So like the first part is just kind of like generically speaking, we noticed like, for instance, like last year we had this like culminating set of protests in Iran. Iranian protests have been accelerating and ongoing for a number of years now, but really they sort of hit the peak last year with the slaying of a woman by the morality police. And at the time, there was like a lot of like disgusting, like repulsive kind of stuff going on in social media with all these like people that, you know, maybe they're like communists or maybe they're sort of like leftist adjacent. And I say this as, you know, somebody very far on the left. But they would say things like, these aren't real protests. These are, you know, agents of the U.S., of the CIA. They're just there to destabilize Iran, right? Actual Iranians, they actually really support the Ayatollah. They support their nation state, which is clearly false. I mean, if you're living in Iran, especially if you're a woman, you have plenty of things to complain about, right? It's perfectly reasonable to assume that you're going to have spontaneous protests. At the same time, I think it's useful to view this idea of a Western-backed coup or Western-backed protest or whatever as a kind of, you know, spectrum, right? There's a kind of continuum here. If, for instance, Donald Trump goes into office and he totally like shutters, right, this sort of international consensus, which is the you know, Iran nuclear deal, which is working just fine, and suddenly reimposes the sanctions on Iran for literally doing nothing wrong whatsoever, it stands to reason that plenty of people in Iran are going to think, okay, look, suddenly now we're back with like, you know, we have new levels of poverty again. Our government looks weak. I don't like this. There's going to be some kind of resentment that boils over, and it's going to find its way into these protests. It's not to say that these are like Western-backed protests and they're being paid off by the government or whatever, but there is a relationship between newfound sanctions and a newfound weakened position in Iran and protests that later emerge spontaneously. There is some level of causal connection. So that's like the top-down view. Specifically in relation to Ukraine, I remember reading articles like during the Orange Revolution, at a time before, again, Russia was really in the news. So people were able to say this kind of stuff openly. Like there were like articles, for instance, in 2004 and 2005 in The Guardian, where they would interview people associated with the Orange Revolution. And these people would say stuff like, look, this isn't like a Western backed thing in some sort of crude way, but we have to be honest. We're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars and in some cases millions of dollars from Westerners, right? Many of them rich, many of them politically connected, and they're allowing, a flourishing civil society to emerge in Ukraine, right? Is that a Western-backed sort of Orange Revolution? I mean, you can't quite say that, but again, there is some sort of spectrum, right? There is some sort of causal relationship between the establishment of a kind of pro-Western civil society with this kind of money and what later emerges, from the other end of it, right? So that's kind of like the first kind of like top-down thing. The second thing I would ask is, imagine if a similar thing was going on in the United States of America. Let's say that, we have like Chinese people coming over, right? Associates of Xi Jinping, and they start, or, let's say Russian associates during 2016, they go to the Rust Belt states. They go to the places that are analogous to the Donbass in the United States of America. And they tell these would-be Trump voters, we hear you. We understand what you're saying. We totally stand by you. We understand why you're upset with the neoliberal order. We understand why you're upset with NAFTA. And you know what? We support you in these protests, and we hope that ultimately you guys have Trump elected. There's no way that America would ever accept that happening. And yet, during the Maidan and shortly before it, you have John McCain, right, who was the 2008 Republican nominee against Obama, right? He's out there. He's saying, we support you guys. Victoria Nuland is passing out cookies and sandwiches, right? We have these, phone calls indicating, who they want to essentially be in power. Americans after 2016, they were sent in such this like crazy tiff over Donald Trump and the possible Russia connection. And yet those links in some ways, right, are weaker than the links between America and Ukraine when it comes to Maidan, right? So again, America would never stand for this if Russia did it here, if Chinese officials would come out doing here. And yet, we're expecting someone else to stand by this, right? So that's like the second thing, right? But I would say that the coup itself, right, like I said earlier, right, like there was this kind of agreement between the Maidan protesters and the Yanukovych administration that was brokered by France and Germany and Poland, where they would mutually disarm, they would tone down the hostilities. There would be, because of this unhappiness with Yanukovych, maybe he did totally fritter away any possibility of goodwill. So they're like, okay, we're going to hold early elections because of all these events. But instead of this transpiring, immediately after there was a violent storming of the administration building and whatnot, America right away recognizes the new Maidan government, counter to the agreement that was brokered very recently before that. That now finally, like, that's starting to have more and more tonality of like, all right, if this is not a Western-backed coup, we're getting awfully close, aren't we? The fourth point being, like Ukraine is a kind of client state. What America now says, like, okay, not this official, we want this official, not this official. We've been doing this now for almost 10 years at this point, right? There is a huge amount of Western influence. The final piece of this, and this is much more recent, we have a Jeffrey Sachs and we have Seymour Hersh. They're saying things like, I know people in government. I've been involved with these people in government, and there was much more Western planning and Western sort of collusion with this coup. Now, we don't know the details. perhaps they're just bullshitting us. Who knows? But in combination with all these facts, I mean, I have my problems with Jeffrey Sachs or whatever, but he's not somebody that I would consider some kind of clown, right? He's a legitimate person. He's done legitimate things, even if you disagree with, shock therapy treatment for Russia, without having a proper functional nation state or whatever. The fact is, he's not some sort of a crazy lunatic, right? So with all these other facts in line, right, it seems like you could make the argument quite credibly that on the spectrum of like no Western coup to Western coup, we're getting very close to the territory of a classical Western style coup. Maybe you want to elaborate on that.
Yes, I think this issue, which I also researched, I presented recently a paper as my study as an annual meeting of American Political Science Association in Montreal, in which I examined the issue about how to classify war in Ukraine and also how to classify Maidan. And according to my research, I think kind of Maidan had different elements. It had the element of mass protest, which was a popular protest, but it was not majority protest. It was close to half of Ukrainians who supported Maidan, but close to half of Ukrainians also opposed Maidan, which you mentioned according to public opinion polls. But this also had elements of political revolution, a political far-right revolution. The far-right organizations wanted to conduct revolution, kind of change political system in Ukraine, have radical changes. So there were such also elements, but this was not kind of dominant kind of revolution because far-right did not took power in Ukraine. They were not by themselves solely. They were kind of minor. They were secondary role after Maidan Massacre, but they played a crucial role both before and their role was oversight role in influence in Ukrainian politics since, but they were not dominant in Ukrainian politics and during the Maidan. But they very crucial role in Maidan Massacre. So this is important in this regard. But in addition to this, there was also kind of elements of coup. So there were elements of coup in Ukraine, and there were also elements of regime change, specifically led by the United States. So all these elements, they were there. And the most important reasons for overthrow of Ukrainian government, which violent overthrow of Ukrainian government, was not because of Maidan protests, because Maidan protests were not effective in this regard. But most important were because of Maidan Massacre, which was conducted by small number of Maidan leaders and Maidan opposition elements and Maidan snipers. So this means would be more consistent with combining, but this was also supported by the United States, which I mentioned, kind of admission by Obama, that they managed transition of power in Ukraine after Maidan Massacre, and also statement by Biden, to kind of, and also this Western statement about 100 protesters need to be killed to change the recognition of Yanukovych. So this all suggests that there was also a policy of regime change. So this means it's not clear actually who actually was decisive in this case during Maidan in change of power. Was it the United States or if U.S. role was supporting or deciding? So it's not kind of clear yet how to classify this. But that's why I used term violent overthrow of the Ukrainian government, which was backed by the Western countries. But I think it's still kind of not sufficient evidence to say whether this was a kind of decisive in terms of U.S. policy, or if this was just policy of Maidan opposition, which was including far-right opposition and oligarchic opposition, which was supported by the United States and other Western countries. So I think still it's necessary to see what kind of issues there were, but I think a very important recognition and information provided by Jeffrey Sachs in this regard, because then also recently by kind of Simon Hersh in his also interviews, that they have insider sources which tell them that there was very significant involvement of the United States, which is not made public, and this is I think this might happen, but again this might be very likely, but I think this also a very important issue, and actually Jeffrey Sachs was very kind of. He contacted me after he read my Maidan studies, and he said that he liked my studies and about Maidan, kind of Maidan, and specifically transition in Maidan Massacre, and so on. And he wrote a very kind of supporting letter of my study about Maidan Massacre after it was initially accepted by a peer-reviewed journal, and then after its acceptance by editor of peer-reviewed journal, after peer reviews of by experts of my Maidan Massacre, my new Maidan Massacre study, it was rejected by this journal because of political reasons. So this he read a very kind of strong letter of support based on my Maidan Massacre study. Even I already published previous version of the study of my study of far-right movement in Maidan Massacre as a peer-reviewed paper. I have also publication in the form of a book chapter and presented at major conferences. This was kind of my comprehensive study of Maidan Massacre, which is kind of now becomes very difficult to publish because of this politically now become kind of very political censorship. Basically now makes it all research which goes against government line or against narrative, dominant narrative, considered to be kind of unacceptable, and even in academia, which is supposed to be open for such research. But he was very supportive in this regard, and I think this is a very crucial issue about this kind of situation. And in case of similarity, I think there is a similarity to Romania, which I mentioned. And according to investigation in Romania, they found that there was also kind of similar situation when protesters were shot by snipers who were never identified. And according to the investigation in Romania, there was no actually government snipers involved in this massacre, but this was done by the opposition, which within Communist Party, which took power and became a new government of Romania, and they specifically executed Ceausescu and accused him of being responsible for the massacre of protesters in Bucharest and other cities of Romania. Even so, they were the ones who actually organized this massacre by kind of using kind of false flag information, and similar kind of plan I think was used in Ukraine. But it's not clear who actually, based on publicly available evidence, who actually designed this plan and what was the involvement of different kind of politicians or different countries. So that's why I cannot say exactly yet. This requires a lot of research, and it's not possible yet to say definitely because a lot of documents are not yet available. They are obviously classified, and this relates to documents both in Ukraine and the Maidan government and the Maidan politicians, but also relates to governments in the United States and other Western countries. But I think there are all the evidence. I think they know definitely that this was not kind of massacre conducted by Yanukovych, that this was actually kind of just part of overthrow of the Ukrainian government. And this is, I think, in this regard, this is a very important issue, but which has also similarity to other kind of policies in other countries. And this is not unique because this is just continuation of U.S. policy, which is documented by many other kind of cases. But I think in case of Ukraine, what happened during Maidan, kind of there are still issues which require kind of information which is not yet publicly available. But I think this issue is a crucial issue in terms of peaceful resolution of this conflict as well, and understanding this, how this conflict originated and how it escalated into war between Russia and Ukraine, and also now proxy war between West and Russia, and also continuation of civil war between also in Donbass. Even so, proxy war and war between Russia and Ukraine are now dominant in terms of war in Ukraine. And civil war became much less significant after the Russian invasion of Ukraine 1 year ago.